Good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and start. Thank you for joining us at the second American History and Western Civilization Challenge Bowl here at the King's College of New York. I'm Angela Kamrath, president of the American Heritage Education Foundation in Houston, Texas. Our website is americanheritage.org if you'd like to know more about what we do. We are very excited and honored to be able to sponsor this event today. Yesterday, we had a great semifinals match between our 4 teams, and today we're going to have the final round of competition between our 2 finalists. Before we proceed, I'd like to briefly reiterate why we're here. AHF started this program to address a growing problem in the nation that many Americans are not informed about America's heritage or the American idea. We believe that this is a serious concern in our self-government because in the United States, we are a republic and we depend on an educated citizenry in order to continue and improve our nation. So we hope that this program will encourage colleges and universities to teach and students to learn America's heritage in these subjects. Subjects include Western civilization and America's founding history, philosophy, laws, governing process, and free market system. We're going to go into the finals. These students are going to receive first and second place scholarship prizes. The winners will also receive one of our books, The Miracle of America. I will turn it over now to our co-founder, Jack Kamrath, my father, and he will introduce the coaches. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Again, welcome to everyone for the second American History and Western Civilization Challenge Bowl. We had the first competition 2 years ago in Houston between 4 teams, 4 colleges: Sam Houston State, Texas State, Houston Baptist University, and Texas Southern University. It was a very competitive competition, ultimately won by Sam Houston State University. So we're glad to have this second event in New York City. We had the 2 semifinal matches yesterday. The Grove City College defeated the James Madison program of Princeton in a good match. And the Abigail Adams Institute of Harvard defeated the King's College in a very close match. So those 2 teams will meet here today in the finals. I would like to introduce the coaches. First, Danilo Petranovic of Harvard University to introduce his team.
Thank you, Jack, very much, and I'd like to thank, again, the Kamrath Foundation for sponsoring this event, as well as King's College for hosting it. We are absolutely delighted to be here and honored to have been invited to participate. I'm the director of an independent scholarly institute, Abigail Adams Institute in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I'm a coach of a Harvard team of 3 wonderful Harvard undergraduates. I will introduce them a little bit differently today, if that's all right. I'll keep it relatively brief. Starting with Finn Brown, who is a senior and an economics major and a philosophy minor. Finn is an amateur photographer as well. You probably, if you didn't have a chance to see our Abigail Adams Institute brochures, you can see some of Finn's work. These wonderful photographs are included in there. Finn also really embodies the spirit of intellectual adventure that Abigail Adams seeks to promote at Harvard and elsewhere. I think you saw a little bit of that in his initial speech yesterday when he weaved in unpredictably themes of Dostoevsky and Western civilization Empire of Liberty language as well. It's absolutely wonderful. Abigail Adams seeks to encourage its students to think bigly and think think outside the box. So it's been an absolute pleasure to know Finn over the last 3 years, and we're delighted to have him. Next, Portia Barry Kilby is a junior, and Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations concentrator. I want to make sure I got that right, focusing more specifically on Arabic and modern Middle East. Portia is also a former chairman of the John Adams Society, a wonderful institution at Harvard, a debating society focused on big themes in political philosophy. And Portia has been a wonderful leader in that institution over the last couple of years. And also, I want to also get this right from her email to me a couple of nights ago, she got a very fancy summer job. She will be based in New York, working at the mission of the Holy See at the United Nations, assisting with the church's diplomatic work. And this is something she wants to do long term, wants to be in diplomacy and politics, serving more broadly Christian causes. So, Portia. And finally, Liam Warner. You've got to know Liam a little bit more yesterday. He is a junior in, and I think he started as an economics concentrator and then moved into classics, sophomore year. Classical languages and literature, that is. Liam is a very smart guy. And also, over the years, especially this last year, I know he has been a wonderful mentor to a lot of younger students at Harvard and Abigail Adams Institute. And he's also very active in John Adams Society and a very skilled debater. So I will stop there, and I'm just proud to present these three wonderful young people here today.
Thank you, Danilo. Good introduction, and welcome the team from Abigail Adams Institute at Harvard. We appreciate your being here. I would now like to introduce Jason Edwards, Dr. Edwards, the coach of the Grove City College team, to introduce his three-person team.
Thank you, Jack. On behalf of Grove City College, I also want to express our thanks for the invitation to participate here. We appreciate the work of the American Heritage Education Foundation and are thrilled to be a part of it. We're very pleased to be joined with you, Harvard, and congratulate you on your advancement here, and we look forward to a great round. I'm excited to introduce my team from Grove City College. All of them are part of the Grove City College Trustees Scholar Program, which is a great program at Grove City College that forms a cohort of a diverse group of students who are very talented and academically minded and supports them in their pursuit. The first I would like to introduce is Elena Peters. Elena is a junior at Grove City College, and she's a history major. Very involved with Phi Alpha Theta, and I know is part of the archaeology program at Grove City College. Next, I would like to introduce Noah Gould. Noah Gould is also a junior at Grove City College. He's an economics major, but being a Renaissance man is also involved in writing a adaptation of Antigone as well, amongst a number of other interests. And he's in economics, is particularly interested in looking at how the economies of Africa are developing and how they may be assisted with that. And finally, I'd like to introduce Carolyn Hartwick. She is a senior philosophy and political science major at Grove City College, also very involved in campus activities, most notably and helpfully for me as a two-year captain of Grove City College's debate team and has won multiple national championships in parliamentary debate. So again, on behalf of Grove City College, we thank King's, the Kamrath family, and the American Heritage Education Foundation, and we're very excited for the contest. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. The competition will be a two-part competition, the first part being an essay portion. The students were given the essay subject last night. Our moderator, Jeremy Tate, will read that before the competition begins. Each student will speak for 4 minutes on that subject. Our judges are Dr. Steve Balch and Dr. Rob Coons. Dr. Steve Balch is the director of the Institute for Western Civ at Texas Tech University, was the founder of the National Association of Scholars, and has been a long friend of American Heritage Education Foundation. Dr. Coons is a professor of philosophy at the University of Texas in Austin. He began the program in Western Civ at UT Austin, and they are not only our judges today, but our researchers. They will actually judge the essays, assign a score to that portion, and we'll put it up on the scoreboard after both sides are finished speaking. And our moderator is Jeremy Tate from Classic Learning Test in Annapolis, Maryland. So with that, we'll get started. We have a timer, and you all are familiar with the timing portion. We just encourage you all to speak up loudly so everyone can hear. Thank you. Flip a coin to see who goes first. Liam? You want to call it heads or tails?
Tails.
It's heads. So you have your choice.
We'll go first in that case.
Okay. So Abigail Adams Institute will go first.
Very good. For those in the audience, just last night, teams received a new essay prompt. They prepared last night and this morning a new 4-minute oral response. We're going to be kicking off with Abigail Adams Institute at Harvard. And first up is Elena. Excuse me, it's Finian. Finn, I'm sorry, yes. Oh, that's correct, okay. All right, the new prompt is this. Discuss the origins, development, and justification of the fundamental American idea that all men are created equal. Go ahead.
So this phrase has become famous because Thomas Jefferson put it in the Declaration of Independence. And it's important not just because it's a foundational idea to this country, but because in the very document it was placed in, it was enacting the very spirit it was espousing. So Thomas Jefferson was certainly a very intelligent man. He was probably a bad economist. He believed in a sort of yeoman farmer theory of American development. He was very influenced by a pre-Smithian French school of economists known as the physiocrats. And they believed that the entire wealth of a nation depended not on its total productivity, but on only the productivity of the land. And this led Jefferson to have economic beliefs, which are probably, in economics we would call it, not efficient. But it led him to an idea which is extremely philosophically important for the beginning of this country, and that is the importance of farming and of land and cultivating a virtue of republicanism. He wrote in a letter to James Madison while he was in France, basically looking at problems they were having with revolutionaries. Whenever there is in any country uncultivated lands and unemployed poor, it is clear that the laws of property have been so far extended as to violate natural right. The earth is given as common stock for man to labor and live on. And this is a belief that Jefferson espoused when he said all men are created equal, because it was not just an idea that you're supposed to hold in your mind, but it was actually something you were supposed to enact as a citizen of a country with almost unlimited potential, not just sort of intellectually, but in terms of land. It was a boundless frontier. So I think this phrase is one of the foundational expressions of American frontier spirit. It helped to create the frontier, and I think we see this, we see further evidence of this in Jefferson's presidency, when we look at how aggressive he was in sending out Lewis and Clark, in acquiring the Louisiana Purchase, and espousing, as I said yesterday, an empire of liberty. Now, we also know that the phrase all men are created equal did not have the same meaning when it was first written that it has today. And I think we should look to the frontier for the answer as to why. The frontier spirit is where all of the important developments and evolutions in expanding what all men applied to first happened. When we think about the debate over slavery, it wasn't in the cities in particular where this first came to heads, but in the westward expansion. We know the Northwest Ordinances famously prohibits slavery in those territories. And on we see that the people who had such a rigorous, restless frontier idea were the ones least comfortable with what turned out to be an extreme violation of American values. But it's those people who were furthest from the cities and pushing the country forward who were most in tune with what true American values turned out to be. So Jefferson also believed in this far before it ever happened. He writes in a letter to John Jay, "Cultivators of the earth are the most valuable citizens, the most vigorous, the most independent, the most virtuous, and they are tied to their country and wedded to its liberty and interests by the most lasting bonds." I think we should remember that, because today, agriculture does not have the place in our country that it used to. And when we think about these ideas, we could be tempted to think of it as a purely intellectual exercise, as an exercise that you're supposed to hold this idea in your mind only. But that wasn't what Jefferson meant. Jefferson wanted this to be an idea that was enacted. And through its enactment, this idea has evolved into our modern sense of equality under God today. Thank you.
All right, next up for Harvard, Portia.
Now, the last time I checked, man boasted different abilities, and one man's strength is oftentimes another man's weakness. It seems as though there is hardly an equal distribution of qualities like intellect, wit, or strength. And all of these characteristics tend to be metrics by which we measure success today. In fact, Kirby argues that the Bible reminds us of the inherent differences between men. For instance, in the Gospel of Luke, when it states, "For unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall be much required." This resonates with the parable of the talents in Matthew. Not only does this seem to suggest that men face different expectations and therefore different endpoints, but also they come from different starting points. But rather than this undermine the notion of equality laid out in the Declaration of Independence, this acknowledgement of inherent difference makes the sentiments of the idea espoused by the Founding Fathers in the Declaration that all men are created equal, deeply profound. For despite all the observable, self-evident differences between men, the fact that to each should be accorded equal treatment under law and that this is asserted as a discernible truth, speaks of the Founding Fathers' respect for personhood and life. And the influence of the Bible in conveying the equality of man in things that really matter cannot be ignored. As we were reminded yesterday, St. Paul writes to the Galatians that there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. Thus, regardless of the discernible differences between man, as formerly mentioned, this pales to insignificance when the higher things are concerned. You see, that men are created equal does not simply mean equality of opportunity or leveling of social class. Of course, at its founding, America always was more egalitarian than its contemporaries in England. That was not burdened by the slums of England, and the rich were not quite as rich. The absence of a hereditary aristocracy arguably meant greater equality of opportunity. And today, this is still seen, with people far and wide declaring that America is the land of opportunity. People come here to realize the American dream with conviction that it will be possible. The truth of the idea of America as a city upon the hill is no less true today than it was when John Winthrop first stated it. But to reduce the idea of all men being created equal to merely that does it a disservice. For we are humbled so much more by acknowledging the founding fathers' idea that they knew men were unequal, but despite this, all are defended with their unalienable rights to equality under the law and to be treated with dignity and respect, to view the pauper with as much dignity and respect as the prince. For to deny man's right to be treated equally under the law is to dismiss man's shared human nature. It shuns our inherited Judeo-Christian tradition, which was so integral to the founding of this country. And when it becomes a possibility to shun this heritage, we threaten our life and liberty, our equal treatment, and how we understand the United States. Thank you.
Thank you. Closing out for the Abigail Adams Institute is Liam.
The belief that all men are created equal is notably absent in classical antiquity, and we find this stated most expressly in the two chief thinkers of classical antiquity, Plato and Aristotle. For example, in the Republic, when Plato has Socrates devise the myth of the metals, which is, of course, a fiction to preserve a structure in society that Plato actually thinks exists, but would not be accepted by people if you told it to them outright, such that the philosopher kings and the guardians and the artisans are actually different because of their natural abilities and not merely because of their upbringings or because of any chance happenings, but need, in order to preserve justice, and by analogy to preserve order in the soul, to stay in their states, because that's what they're best at doing. They need to stay in their own lanes, and that is how Socrates goes about defining justice. Likewise, Aristotle has a rather infamous defense of slavery in Book 1 of the Politics, where he argues that certain people are simply more naturally suited to be slaves. They have a more servile nature, and certain people have a more masterly nature, and that's just how things are, and people ought to accept that. Naturally, that causes no shortage of controversy as the centuries go on. We could also try to say that the Old Testament gives us an idea of inequality insofar as the chosen people were clearly discriminated against in the classical sense of making a difference between two things, were clearly elevated by God in order to raise up his Messiah centuries later. And no one would have asserted an equality in the way that comes most naturally to us now between the Israelites and the Gentiles, even though the Gentiles were also bound by the Noahide laws, though they didn't have to observe the 613 mitzvot. And this distinction, once it had served its purpose of elevating out of Israel the Messiah, was abolished in the New and Eternal Testament, as we heard yesterday in St. Paul. So we go gradually toward an expansion of equality to more and more people. And we see this even down into the medieval period and into the early modern period. So where this comes most to a head in the political sphere is also where we heard it yesterday, perhaps in the case of the English Civil War, in the fight between Charles I and Parliament over who was the supreme legislator of the country, and taking up the due process rights asserted in the Magna Carta. Parliament said that the divine right of kings, as asserted by Charles I, was in fact a sort of tyranny that elevated the king even above his own laws, so that he could arbitrarily abrogate laws he had passed and throw people in jail without bills of attainder or the rights of habeas corpus. And they presented, therefore, the petition of right and the grand remonstrance in order to assert that not even the king was above his own law. And Charles's defense in the Aecon Basilicae was, although slightly persuasive after his execution, not powerful enough against the egalitarianism in the political sense of people like John Milton. And as you continue down into the founding of America, the idea of the equality under the law has to be understood in a very narrow sense, because the founders didn't even scruple to include provisions of property qualifications for voting. But they didn't understand that as a discrimination of the fundamental character of mankind, of the baptized before God. They view that as a discrimination based on talent. But certainly no one would say that the rights before God of life, liberty, and property would be disparaged by a hierarchy of competence politically. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, kicking off for Grove City College will be Elena. And contestants can use notes for the speech part.
Human equality is the most foundational American idea. When Jefferson wrote that all men are created equal, he did not mean equal in a base, animalistic sense of the term. He meant that men are equally valuable. This comes directly from a Judeo-Christian understanding of man as being made imago Dei, in the image of God. An idea that is strong enough to last for centuries can be likened to a house. It needs a firm foundation, is built upon and developed through centuries, and must be maintained so that it will not crumble. Just as Abraham Lincoln said, quoting scripture, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." Without all three of these parts, the truth that all men are created equal would not be as self-evident as Jefferson believed. Thus, I will talk about the foundations and origins of human equality. Carolyn will talk about building on this idea and developing it, and Noah will talk about the justification or the maintenance of this house. I claim that the origin of human equality is found in the ancient Judeo-Christian world, which held radically countercultural perceptions of the value of man. They believed in the inherent value of individuals regardless of their temporal qualities. I will discuss this in three distinct periods of early Judeo-Christian history. First, the nation of Israel. There are three special groups of people talked about in the Old Testament: orphans, widows, and aliens. The Israelites are commanded not to oppress these people or to pervert justice for them. In his Justice for All, Jeremiah Unterman compares these laws to other practices in the Near East, and he asserts that the Israelites were unique because they put these protections for underprivileged people in a written law, whereas in other societies, people had to rely on the king to arbitrarily apply them. The Israelites were also distinct from ancient Greeks, because the Israelites were reminded of the fact that they too were aliens in Egypt, while Greeks looked down very much so on people who were not Greek themselves. Second, the life of Christ. Jesus broke down many social barriers and intentionally loved people as individuals. We see this clearly in the story of the leper who asks Jesus to heal him. Jesus says, "Be healed," and reaches out and touches the man. Jesus, God made flesh, did not need to even be in the presence of the man to heal him, but this act of a touch was an intimate act of compassion for a man whom no one else would even dare to walk by on the sidewalk. Jesus showed compassion to children, widows, demon-possessed, fishermen, even tax collectors. His life truly shows us what it looks like to love your neighbor as yourself. Lastly, we have the early church. Jesus gave the Great Commission to go and make disciples of all nations. His apostles did so, which meant that the gospel and the blessings and sacrifice which were promised in the Old Testament to Jews were expanded to people that were not Jews, specifically the Gentiles. For the Jews who believed that they were holy and set apart and held strictly to the following of Old Testament law did not easily accept this idea. The fact that Paul had to rebuke Peter and remind him of the truth of the gospel that is for both Jews and Gentiles shows how deeply set this prejudice against Gentiles was. The Judeo-Christian ethics of the ancient world were radical. While others set value in wealth, status, and identity, they put it in the inherent God-given value of individuals. Thus, the ancient Judeo-Christian world has given us the foundation for human equality based in imago Dei. Thank you.
Next for Grove City will be Carolyn.
The foundation laid by the Judeo-Christian ethic was practiced socially by many individuals and communities from the time of Christ's death and through the centuries afterwards. But the political expression of the equality of man was not actually popularized until John Locke, who wrote in the late 17th century, and so it is to the building of this house that we now turn. Locke was the first philosopher to contend that man was created equal, and so not just equal in value, but equal before the law and equal in terms of the natural right to rule. No man, he said, was by nature a ruler or to be ruled. His argument, which was made in the second treatise, echoes the religious language of his time and is based on a particular conception of man. Man, he says, is the work of one omnipotent and infinitely wise maker. Locke's ideas and all of his works were embedded in a fundamentally Protestant context, and biblical ideas permeate his entire line of thought. Indeed, his 1695 Reasonableness of Christianity argued that the biblical revelation is compatible with the natural reason of man. Why did it take so long, though, for this fundamental idea of Imago Dei to permeate and overhaul political thought? The simple answer to that is the fallen nature of man. According to Alexis de Tocqueville, writing in the Introduction to Democracy in America, the political development of equality took a certain degree of social and economic leveling throughout Europe before this particular ideal could actually be seen. Throughout this process of leveling, however, the church played a key role, for it was the church which spread enlightenment and applied within its bosom the principle of Christian equality. Locke's political philosophy was particularly influential in the American colonies, where the context of the colonists made the reality of Imago Dei easier to realize. This context included both the absence of a landed aristocracy and a particular religious heritage. That religious heritage, which included the Puritans and, of course, the First Great Awakening, was based in certain ideas of fundamental social equality. And it was in this context that the equality of man became the justification and central premise of the Declaration of Independence. As Lincoln later said, we were a nation dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Lincoln, when urging Americans to uphold the Declaration, called on them as both Christians and patriots to act upon what they professed, that nothing stamped with the divine image and likeness was sent into this world to be trodden on, degraded, and imbruted by its fellows. Frederick Douglass, in his powerful July 4th speech in 1852, condemned the hypocrisy of many of his fellow Americans who were content to celebrate their own liberty while at the same time ignoring the plight of their brothers, their fellow equal men in chains. The promise of equality for all men, regardless of their race, was legally enshrined in the 1860s, and that promise was fulfilled in large part by belief in and action upon the idea that all men are created in the image of God. This same motivating belief drove many of those who argued for the political equality of women. Even as John Adams was helping to draft the Declaration of Independence, his wife, Abigail Adams, was writing him letters, encouraging him to understand that this principle applied not simply to men, but to women as well. The Seneca Falls Declaration of 1848 echoed the Declaration of Independence, not simply in its language, but in its train of thought, extending its principles, again, to demonstrating that they applied to women as well. That movement, which culminated in 1920, once again owed its success to the Judeo-Christian ideal. The political theory and practice of all men are created equal relies on the anthropological foundation laid down by that Judeo-Christian ethic. Locke provided the blueprint for building on that foundation, the founders the beginning, and Adams, Lincoln, Douglass, and countless others provided further stories, and each laid a brick. The foundation laid by the Judeo-Christian ethic, a beautiful edifice is perhaps self-justifying, but whether a cathedral or a house, it is placed in the fallen world, and as such, it draws the attention of barbarians who look to tear it down. But likewise, neglect, hubris, and selfishness by those who live within that house will lead to its destruction, the destruction of even the greatest architectural achievements, and it is to the maintenance of that house that we now turn. Thank you.
Thank you. And closing out for Grove City will be Noah.
The foundation of the building of equal rights started in the Old and New Testaments. The development of the building happened in the early modern period. And now we turn to the period of maintenance, asking ourselves the question, how will this idea of the equality of man be maintained? How will the house stand? In the last 150 years, two plans have emerged for the maintenance of this house. As Whittaker Chambers said, the eternal question is God or man, and these two plans parallel this idea. The first plan follows closely the idea of the Imago Dei, resting its premises in this idea that people are created in the image of God. In the letter from the Birmingham jail, Martin Luther King Jr. appealed to fellow clergymen, placing himself strongly within the bounds of Christian theology. He said that he would build his movement on the solid rock of human dignity. Instead of condemning Christianity in its ideals, he called others to responsibly and consistently apply the ideas of Christianity. In fact, we now call him Doctor, but Martin Luther King Jr. went by Reverend during his life. This is because the civil rights movement is also a story of the church. Those leaders, such as Malcolm X, who were not Christians, soon became disenchanted with the idea because they did not have a solid basis for these ideas. The second plan in the last 150 years has been to deny God as the foundation. Nietzsche said that God is dead, and Sartre said that existence precedes essence. We can create our own reality. And Marx said that we get our value through work, or the organizations that we are a part of. On a global scale, these ideas clashed in World War II and in the Cold War. Secular modernists inspired authoritarian regimes of the Nazis and communists, while the idea of Imago Dei, this Christian idea, inspired the Allies. However, these ideas did not perish along with the Nazis or with the fall of the Berlin Wall. These ideals remain today. We stand now in a house divided, not along lines of war, but in our fundamental ideas. When we talk about equality, we all know that we should say that people are equal, and yet most of society denies God and denies consistent morality. So we have denied the basis of our equality. We are living in a contradiction. A house divided such needs no outward enemy to crumble. It reduces childbearing to a war between the mother and her child, reduces marriage to a war of power between spouses, reduces old age to a battle between the state and the family. So how must we save this divided house doomed to fail? First, to repair the house, we need to know where these ideas came from. To educate people about where the foundation of these beliefs come from. Teddy Roosevelt said that we need to build monuments to the past. And Noah Webster said, teach children about leaders. And so I stand with my brothers and sisters at Harvard today when I echo the original mission statement of Harvard saying, we must lay Christ at the bottom as the only foundation of sound knowledge. We must acknowledge the unique heritage of the Imago Dei, that we are each made in the image of God, and that we are each get our value from his consistent nature. This is the gospel that says we are each able to come to know God because of our nature being redeemable and being made by him. And so surely the house will not fall.
Thank you, both your teams. Great job. The judges will now tally the essay calculations to come up with the initial score on the scoreboards. Each judge will judge each student up to a total of 100 points. So the maximum score a team could have would be 300. And that's for both sides, of course. And you'll notice that some of the students used note cards today. We permitted that last night when we gave them this topic that they just spoke on, because they had just received the topic last night, and notes were permitted, and you noticed that. Yesterday, during the semifinal match, we had the essay questions that they were presented to about 2 months ago, and they were not allowed to use notes. So that's a two-step approach that we are trying in this competition. So give us a few minutes and we'll post the scores.
All right, going into the final history toss-up, we have the Abigail Adams Institute at Harvard at 276 and Grove City College at 282.
Thank you, Jeremy. The toss-up portion of the competition will consist of a toss-up question. Each team has a buzzer system, and the first team buzzing in to answer the question correctly gets 10 points. It'll be followed by a follow-up question worth 5 points, and then on to the next toss-up question. If a team buzzes in before the toss-up question is completed and answers that question incorrectly, they lose 5 points. So there's a penalty for buzzing in too quickly and not getting the question correctly. And if they wait till the question is over and answer the question incorrectly, the other team will have an opportunity to answer that question for a 10-point bonus, 10-point toss-up.
All right, here we go. Greco-Roman toss-up. Which of the following Western barbarian kingdoms were never officially Aryan? That of the Visigoths, the Franks, the Vandals, or the Lombards?
The Lombards.
Incorrect.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes. Which of the following Western barbarian kingdoms were never officially Aryan? That of the Visigoths, the Franks, the Vandals, or the Lombards?
The Franks.
That is correct. Grove City College for 10 points. Greco-Roman follow-up. Added to the original Nicene Creed, this clause led to a heated theological dispute between Western and Eastern Christians. What is this clause called?
The Filioque Clause.
Correct. 5 points for Grove City College. Greco-Roman toss-up. What part of the U.S. federal government is named after the Roman Council of Elders?
Senate.
Correct. 10 points for Harvard. Greco-Roman follow-up. What Latin word means I forbid?
Veto.
Correct. 5 points for Harvard. History toss-up. The whiskey ring scandal, the Trader Post scandal, the Star Route postal scandal, and the Black Friday scandal all occurred during one president's administration.
Grant.
Correct. Harvard for 10 points. History follow-up. This populist leader was the Democratic nominee for president in 1896. He was a supporter of bimetallism, supporting the acceptance of both gold and silver as legal tender. What is his name?
William Jennings Bryan.
Correct. 5 points for Harvard. History toss-up. The Gilded Age, A Tale of Today, was an 1873 novel satirizing.
Mark Twain.
Correct. Yep. And for the audience, read the rest of the question. A Tale of Today was an 1873 model satirizing greed and corruption in post-Civil War America. One of its authors was Charles Dudley Warner, who was Warner's co-author. Again, Mark Twain. Very good. History follow-up. This man built an economic empire selling kerosene to give the poor man his cheap light. He later offered other oil byproducts and made them affordable through low pricing, vertical integration, and buying out his competitors. What is his name?
Rockefeller.
Correct. Harvard for 5 points. History toss-up. This penniless Scottish immigrant built America's greatest.
Andrew Carnegie.
Correct. Built America's greatest, 10 points for Grove City. Built America's greatest innovative and technology steel company. In 1907, he successfully organized an effort to revolve. Very good. All right, history follow-up. This man is probably America's most famous financier. He bought Carnegie Steel and transformed it into the United States Steel.
J.P. Morgan.
Correct. 5 points for Grove City College. History toss-up. The text of the Constitution does not explicitly grant the power of judicial review to the United States Supreme Court.
Marbury versus Madison.
Correct. 10 points for Harvard. Does not explicitly grant the power of judicial review. Nevertheless, the United States Supreme Court formally assumed it in Marbury versus Madison. History follow-up. What 1610 case, authored by Sir Edward Coke, Chief Justice of the Court of Common Pleas, is the first case establishing the power of judicial review in common law jurisprudence?
Johnson.
It is incorrect. Grove City?
It was a follow-up.
Okay, that's right. Okay. Enlightenment toss-up. An apostate Dutch Jew, this 17th century.
Spinoza.
Correct. 10 points to Grove City College. An apostate Dutch Jew, this 17th century pantheistic philosopher is often regarded as having raised the curtain on the Enlightenment. Spinoza. Enlightenment follow-up? Who was the enlightened Russian monarch who once played host to Diderot?
Catherine the Great.
Correct. 5 points to Grove City College. Enlightenment toss-up. This thinker wrote a 6-volume history of England, published in 1754.
David Hume.
Correct. This work was a bestseller in both 10 points for Grove City College. This work was a bestseller in both England and the American colonies. Enlightenment follow-up. This English politician was the leader of the Tory party, supported the Church of England despite his unorthodox deism, and supported the Jacobite rebellion in 1715 against George I. Pardoned for his role in the rebellion, he returned to retire in England, spending his later years writing history and political theory, including The Patriot King and a dissertation on parties. Who was this 18th century English politician? Who is Henry St. John? Enlightenment toss-up. This American author was born of a line of New England clergymen. He left the Unitarian Church, and his school of philosophy is called Transcendentalism. His best-known essays include...
Emerson?
Correct. Harvard for 10 points. His best-known essays include Self-Reliance and The American Scholar. Enlightenment follow-up. Emerson influenced another important writer and philosopher who retreated from civic life to spend a year communing with nature near Walden Pond in Massachusetts. What was his name?
Thoreau.
Correct. 5 points for Harvard. Reformation toss-up. In his second treatise on government, chapter 5, John Locke argued that a right to private property existed in the state of nature. How, according to Locke?
Add one's labor to the land.
Correct. 10 points for Grove City College. Reformation follow-up. Locke also mentions in chapter 5 two further provisos that must be met in order to appropriate property in a state of nature by mixing one's labor with it. It is not sufficient that the object or land be previously unapportioned. What is one of these two further conditions that must be met before something can be appropriated by one's labor?
It has to have not already been the property of someone else.
Okay, that is incorrect. One must leave as much good behind for others. Reformation toss-up. Which European king issued the Edict of Nantes in 1598?
Louis XII.
It is incorrect. That'll be 5 points off for Harvard. 5 points off for Harvard. Yep. Repeat the question. Grove City. Which European king issued the Edict of Nantes in 1598?
Henry IV.
Of?
France.
Correct. 10 points for Grove City College. Reformation follow-up. To which group did this edict extend toleration?
Protestant Huguenots.
Correct. 5 points for Grove City College. Medieval toss-up. Which English king fought in the Crusades?
Richard the Lionheart.
Correct. 10 points for Grove City College. Medieval follow-up. Richard's brother, who succeeded him to the throne, was forced to sign the Magna Carta. What was his name?
John.
Correct. Grove City College, 5 points. Renaissance toss-up. Pope Julius II commissioned Michelangelo to paint the walls and ceiling of what room in the Vatican?
Sistine Chapel.
Correct. Grove City College, 10 points. Renaissance follow-up. Michelangelo did a sculpture of an Israeli king. Who is that king?
David.
Correct. 5 points for Grove City College. Renaissance toss-up. The Decameron is the most famous work.
Boccaccio.
Correct. 10 points for Harvard. Of this 14th century poet. Very good. Renaissance follow-up. Beloved by Dante, this Italian woman might have been the model for a character in his Divine Comedy. Who was she?
Beatrice.
Correct. 5 points for Harvard. Bible toss-up. In the Epistle to the Romans, chapter 13, the Apostle Paul wrote about our duty to obey legitimate government, which he describes as deriving their government from God. What function does he ascribe to the governing authority as God's minister?
That he bears not the sword in vain, and he, well, execute justice against wrongdoers.
Correct. 10 points for Harvard. Bible follow-up. In Romans 14, verse 13, Paul writes that we should not do this to each other, because each of us shall give an account of himself to God. What is it we must not do to one another?
Judge.
Correct. 5 points for Harvard. Greco-Roman toss-up. This Roman lawyer, politician, and philosopher.
Cicero.
That is correct. I'll read the rest of the question. This Roman lawyer, politician, and philosopher was deeply influenced by Greek philosophy. His letters provide important source material for the workings of the Roman Republic during its last days. He gave a famous series of speeches against Mark Antony, and he was assassinated on Mark Antony's orders. His head and hands were then displayed in the Forum as a final act of revenge. Greco-Roman follow-up. Name the members of the first triumvirate in Rome.
Julius Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus.
Correct. Harvard, 5 points. Greco-Roman toss-up. When the Roman Republic was founded, reputedly in 509 BC, Roman citizens took an oath that they would never again suffer a king to rule in Rome. On February 14th, 44 BC, a Roman politician and general.
Brutus.
That is incorrect. It'll be 5 points off for Harvard.
Can you repeat the whole question?
Yes. Greco-Roman toss-up. When the Roman Republic was founded, reputedly in 509 BC, Roman citizens took an oath that they would never again suffer a king to rule in Rome. On February 14th, 44 BC, a Roman politician and general was named dictator for life. Name this Roman politician and general.
Julius Caesar.
Correct. Grove City College for 10 points. Greco-Roman follow-up. One of Julius Caesar's assassins had the same name as the founder of the Roman Republic. What was this name?
Brutus.
Correct. Grove City College for 5 points. Greco-Roman toss-up. The Roman Republic suspended its normal checks and balances during extreme military emergencies.
Dictatorship.
That is correct. I will finish with the question. During such emergencies, one individual would be given supreme power for a period of no more than 6 months. Very good. Greco-Roman follow-up. The Roman citizen was appointed dictator on 2 occasions during military emergencies. Each time he successfully navigated the crisis and then laid down his dictatorial powers before the end of his term. He was legendary among the Romans for his civic virtue. What is his name?
Cincinnatus.
Correct. Harvard for 5 points. History toss-up. After the cessation of hostilities in World War I, Woodrow Wilson traveled to Paris Peace Conference, where he presented his 14 points, a statement of principles for peace. The last point called...
League of Nations.
That is correct. The last point called for a formation of a general association, association of nations to guarantee political independence and territorial integrity for all nations. History follow-up. Who famously and sarcastically commented on Wilson's 14 points by stating, "Mr. Wilson bores me with his 14 points. Why God Almighty has only 10?
Henry Cabot Lodge.
It is incorrect. Oh, sorry, okay. French Prime Minister George Benjamin Clemenceau. History toss-up. What protections are provided to the American people by the Fourth Amendment?
It's time.
Okay. All right, very good.
So the competition has two halves, two 15-minute halves. We just finished the first half. And as you can see, Grove City has a slim lead of 417 to 396 over the Abigail Adams Institute. We'll take a 5-minute break and proceed after that.
All right, here we go. Enlightenment toss-up. This 18th century English poet was This 18th century English poet was Roman Catholic and largely self-educated.
Dryden.
It is incorrect. 5 points off for Harvard. This 18th century English poet was Roman Catholic and largely self-educated. He wrote a number of satirical poems, including The Rape of Locke. He is best known for a long philosophical poem, Essay on Man, in which he sought to vindicate the ways of God to man. Who was this influential English poet?
Alexander Pope.
That is correct. Grove City for 10 points. Enlightenment follow-up. This English politician was a member of the Long Parliament and an opponent of Oliver Cromwell. After the restoration of the monarchy, he wrote a treatise, Discourses Concerning Government, in which he rejected the divine right of kings and absolute monarchy. What was the name of this martyr for Whiggish principles?
Sydney.
That is correct. 5 points for Grove City College. Enlightenment toss-up. This American poet was born in 1830 in Amherst, Massachusetts.
Emily Dickinson.
That is correct. In the last 20 years of her life, she never left her hometown. Her poems reflected the struggle between despondency and hope, faith and doubt, and hard truths and comforting illusions. Enlightenment follow-up. This 20th century American author was born and lived in Savannah, Georgia. She was disabled by lupus. She wrote 2 books, Wise Blood in 1952 and The Violent Bear It Away in 1960, considered masterpieces of Southern Gothic literature. Who was this American writer?
Flannery O'Connor.
That is correct. 5 points for Grove City College. Enlightenment toss-up. The 18th century struggle known in America as the French and Indian War is more generally called
7 Years' War.
It is correct. 10 points for Grove City College. Enlightenment follow-up. This color is named after that of the uniforms worn by the 18th century Prussian army. What is that color?
Prussian blue.
That is correct. 5 points for Grove City College. Reformation toss-up. In the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson declared that governments were established to protect the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In his second treatise on government,
Life, liberty, and property.
that is correct. In his second treatise on government, John Locke gives a somewhat different list. Very good. Reformation follow-up. In the same book, chapter 8, John Locke argues that there is only one legitimate way for people to escape the state of nature and form a commonwealth, wealth, or political society. What is this one legitimate way?
The social contract.
That is correct. 5 points for Harvard. Reformation toss-up. This English mathematician, astronomer, and natural philosopher was the master of the Royal Mint and president of the Royal Society. His masterpiece, the Philosophiae Naturae Principia Mathematica, contained 4 fundamental laws of motion.
Newton.
That is correct. 10 points, Harvard. Reformation follow-up. Newton spent much of his investigating a field that is now considered to be pure pseudoscience. What was this field?
Alchemy.
Correct. Harvard for 5 points. Medieval toss-up. This philosopher lived in Rome after it had been conquered by the Ostrogoths in the late 5th century AD. He wrote a book while he was unjustly imprisoned for treason, a book in which philosophy...
Boethius?
That is correct. 10 points for Grove City College. A book in which philosophy, represented by a woman, encouraged him to bear trials patiently and trust in God's providence. Medieval follow-up. What was the name of the book he wrote during his imprisonment?
The Consolation of Philosophy.
Correct. Grove City College for 5 points. Renaissance toss-up. The Forza family long ruled over what Italian city?
Milan.
That is correct. 10 points for Harvard. Renaissance follow-up. This French king invaded Italy in 1499 to claim the crown of Naples. Naples. Who was he?
Francis II.
It is incorrect.
Follow-up.
It'd be Louis the 12th. Bible toss-up. This book of the New Testament is also the name of the owner of a runaway slave. Paul urges...
Philemon?
That is correct. 10 points for Grove City College. Paul urges the owner to treat the runaway as a brother in Christ rather than as a slave. Bible follow-up. What was the name of the runaway slave? That is, it does start with an O. It is Onesimus. Okay. Bible toss-up. According to Genesis, what did God bring into being on the fourth day of creation?
The animals.
That is incorrect, and 5 off for Grove City College. Bible toss-up. According to Genesis, what did God bring into being on the fourth day of creation?
The sun and the moon.
That's correct. 10 points. Bible follow-up. According to the King James Bible, what day were the great whales created?
The 6th.
That is incorrect. It would be the 5th. Greco-Roman Greco-Roman toss-up. Name the Roman emperor who reputedly made his horse a senator.
Caligula.
That is correct. Harvard for 10 points. Greco-Roman follow-up. Name this Roman emperor. He was the last of the 5 good emperors. He's also remembered as a Stoic philosopher and particularly influenced by the Greek Stoic philosopher Epictetus. He lived from 121 AD to 180.
Marcus Aurelius.
That is correct. 5 points for Harvard. Greco-Roman toss-up. This emperor directed a project from 529 to 534 AD.
Justinian.
That is correct. 10 points for Harvard. 534 AD, by which Roman law was codified in a work known as the Corpus Juris Civilis. This work was lost by the 8th century. Its rediscovery in Italy during the 12th century laid the foundation for the civil law code. Greco-Roman follow-up. What is the name of the great urban riot that broke out in 532 AD during Justinian's reign? Nearly half of Constantinople was destroyed and tens of thousands of people were killed.
The Nike riots.
That is correct. 5 points for Harvard. History toss-up. The 27th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution.
This could be about any number of things. That Congress shall not raise its salary between or until another election shall have passed.
That is correct for the 27th Amendment, but that is not the correct answer. The 5 points off for Harvard. The 27th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was sent to the states by Congress as part of what package of other 1789 resolutions?
The Bill of Rights.
That is correct. 10 points for Grove City. History follow-up. What amendment of the Bill of Rights guarantees a right to counsel?
It's 5 or 6.
The fifth. That would be the 6th, actually. History toss-up. This 1860 presidential candidate, thought to have held Lincoln's hat at his first inauguration, was a Democrat who tried to preserve the Union. Who was he?
Stephen Douglas.
That is correct. Harvard for 10 points. History follow-up. Name the Louisianan commanding the Confederate forces assaulting Fort Sumter.
Stewart.
Be Beauregard. History toss-up. What was the name of Nathaniel Hawthorne's most famous romance in which Hester Prynne is accused of adultery?
The Scarlet Letter.
That is correct. 10 points for Harvard. History follow-up. Which president was the subject of a laudatory biography written by his old college friend Nathaniel Hawthorne?
Millard Fillmore.
Be Franklin Pierce. History toss-up. After the administration of George Washington, subsequent presidential nominees of the Federalist Party were chosen by what institution?
The House of Representatives.
That is incorrect. Grove City?
Could you repeat the question?
After the administration of George Washington, subsequent presidential nominees of the Federalist Party were chosen by what institution?
Caucus.
Correct. 10 points for Grove City College. History follow-up. This party held the first national presidential convention in American history. The convention was held in Baltimore, Maryland. What was the name of the party?
Democratic Republicans.
It is incorrect. The Anti-Masonic Party. Renaissance toss-up.
Kind of forgot they existed.
Which Renaissance artist painted the School of Athens?
Raphael.
It is correct. 10 points for Harvard. Renaissance follow-up. In the painting, two philosophers are depicted in the center, one pointing up and one pointing down. Which is pointing down and which is pointing up?
Plato is pointing up and Aristotle is pointing down.
That is correct. 5 points for Harvard. Greco-Roman toss-up. Who was the famous lawgiver of ancient Sparta?
Lycurgus.
It's correct. 10 points for Grove City College. Greco-Roman follow-up. In the ancient Athenian constitution of Clathonisus, how many citizens served on each jury?
$500.
That is correct. 5 points for Grove City College. Enlightenment toss-up. The three great events of 1776 included the Declaration of Independence, the publication of the Wealth of Nations, and the patenting of an important invention. What invention is it?
The cotton gin.
That is incorrect.
The steam engine.
That is correct. Grove City College for 10 points. Enlightenment follow-up. What 18th century What 18th century person built the first commercially profitable steam engine, which was a precursor to Watt's?
Fulton.
Thomas Newcomen. Renaissance toss-up. This English Renaissance playwright and rival of Shakespeare was fatally stabbed.
Marlowe.
That is correct. Harvard for 10 points. Renaissance follow-up. In which Marlowe play does the line occur? Was this the face that launched 1,000 ships?
Troilus and Cressida.
That is incorrect. Dr. Faustus. Renaissance toss-up. This radical Dominican friar led a popular uprising in Florence in the late...
Savonarola.
That is correct. Harvard for 10 points. In the late 5th century, for which he was burned at the stake. Renaissance follow-up. What was the name of the radical Calvinist reformer who helped lead the opposition to Mary, Queen of Scots?
John Knox.
That's correct. 5 points for Harvard. Renaissance toss-up. The careful observations of this Danish astronomer provided the data.
Tycho Brahe.
Correct. Grove City College for 10 points.
Okay, we've had a bit of accounting and taken care of that. I'd like to introduce the Harvard team, the runner-up team from the Abigail Adams Institute, Portia Berry Kilby. Finian Brown. And Leon Warner. Our first place team from Grove City College, for each a check cash scholarship for $4,000. Elena Peters. Carolyn Hartwick. And Noah Gould. So that concludes our second American History and Western Civilization Challenge Bowl here in New York City at the King's College. We want to again thank the King's College for being our partner in this event. We hope to do it in the future and expand it. But thank you for participating. Thank you, students. Thank you, judges. Thank you, moderator. We really appreciate it and we've enjoyed it. Thank you.